I am Rebecca White, so I'm the current state member for Lyons and a federal candidate for Lyons.
Why did you enter politics?
I got into politics when I was in my 20s, and that was as a result of my interest in what was happening federally at the time. We had an election that was underway. It was John Howard, Kevin Rudd, and there were a couple of big issues on the agenda that I was particularly engaged by. One was ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, which I thought was very important, and that was something the Labor Party was going to do if elected, and also work choices, so the changes around industrial relations here in our country. So that was my engagement with political process, and I was working for a federal member at the time. But my interest in community development began much earlier than that. I grew up in a really small country town called Nugent, where everyone just pitched in and helps each other out. And for me, I think that's how I define my type of politics. It's actually getting involved at a grassroots level and helping to build stronger communities.
Did you talk much politics when you were growing up, or can you talk about your experience growing up?
Yeah, we didn't talk about party politics growing up. It wasn't something that really got discussed, but we talked a lot about local politics and local events that might be happening in our community. And Dad was particularly interested in making sure that rural communities had a voice in those decisions that were being taken, and was very vocal about that. And we were always brought up to take the view that if something bothers you, there's no point in complaining about it. You've got to get involved and try and make a difference. So that was the philosophy I was brought up with. And I think that's sort of coupled with growing up in the country where everyone has to pitch in. There's no such thing as can't. If something breaks, you've got to fix it. Your family's livelihood depends upon it. And it was really just a no-nonsense upbringing. And as a small kid growing up on a farm, you're expected to pitch in and work a bit like an adult half of the time. So I've got from that a really strong work ethic, and I like to help other people, and I've been taught that if you want to change something, you've got to get in and have a crack. So I think for me, they're pretty fundamental values that have guided me into politics.
So you just mentioned some of your important values for yourself. Are there any other important values?
Yeah, and those values are the sorts of things that drew me to the Labor Party too. For me, values of fairness are very fundamental for things that I take an interest in. Values of equality and social justice and building communities. So I really value loyalty and friendship as well. But I think when it comes to decision making, it's about, is this fair? Does this make our society more inclusive and cohesive? Is this going to leave people better off? So they're the sort of prisms through which I make decisions.
What are some of the key issues for you?
There's lots of issues that I'm really passionate about, and particularly having an interest in regional Tassie. I want to make sure that no matter where you live, you get a fair go, whether that's access to good quality public education, public healthcare, making sure that people have got training opportunities so they can get a job, and access to that employment opportunity. Obviously, transport's a big barrier for lots of people when you're living in the country. So I'm interested in making sure that no matter where you live, you can access those good government services, and there's no barrier in your way. If there's a barrier, that we can help try and mitigate that in some way. So they're the things I'm really passionate about. Obviously, they're things that align quite strongly with the Labor Party and what it represents about people and community, and making sure our economy is fair and works for people.
What do you think makes a good politician, and then what advice would you give to someone entering politics?
I would say that to be a good politician, you need to be a good listener. And you can't represent your community unless you're out there to hear what matters to them, so that you can take that back, either to make a decision at the table of government, if you're privileged to be in that position, or in the Parliament when you're debating legislation. So being a good listener, being responsive. It's really important that when people come to you, have a tough moment in their life and they're seeking help, that you can help them in whatever capacity you can. Sometimes you can't, but you need to be able to tell them that. So being a good listener, being responsive, and doing what you say you're going to do. I think there's a bit of a challenge in our democracy, and it's not unique to Australia at the moment, where people feel quite cynical about politics. And in large part, I suspect that's because people don't think politicians are in it for the right reasons, or They've been let down so many times that they don't really believe what they're being told. So there's a real trust deficit there, and that's why it's so important to follow through on the things that you say you're going to do. So my advice to anyone who's looking to get into politics would be to learn what your community actually wants from you. Talk to as many people as you can. More importantly, listen to what they're telling you, and then get in there and fight for it.
What have you found as some of the challenges in politics?
Where do I start? I think that a lot of people presume that politicians can fix everything, and that's not generally the case. We have to work together across different levels of government, across community, across industry and private sector to deliver sustainable and durable change, because if we don't have consensus about the things that we're working to achieve together, then it changes as soon as the government changes and people feel like they haven't made any progress. So that's a challenge. I think when you have changes in government, you have changes in policy, and sometimes that's because the community wants that, but it can also undo good things. And so one of the challenges, I think, is to overcome those differences by working together as often as we possibly can, because the community benefits then, because you get durable agreements. I think one of the other challenges in politics is just generally the polarisation of our society, whether it's through the polarisation of media. People see different things because their algorithm feeds them different information. So their view of the world is very different from their neighbours. We don't have mass communication so that people are reading and hearing the same things and don't have a shared experience of what it is to live in our community as much as we did even a decade ago. And so that does make it hard to build consensus. It makes it hard for us to come together around key issues because we don't always think the same things are important. So that's a challenge for people like me as politicians, to be able to communicate really clearly about why something might be an issue and how we work together to fix it. And that's something that I see confronting governments right across the world, as we see a splintering of media markets and the splintering of how people receive information and understand what actually is a priority for their community.
Do you see trends in politics overseas and trends here? I guess, what do you see happening in Australia?
Yeah, I think there are trends that we need to be alert to here in Australia that you can see play out internationally, and America's the most recent example, and Europe shows that too, where we've seen a pushback against incumbent governments because of the challenges people are facing in their daily lives. Cost of living issues that people are feeling the pinch with day to day are really hurting, and they want their government to do something to fix it, and governments are being punished if they haven't been able to show they are addressing those challenges. So we have to be awake to that here in Australia. I know that the Prime Minister very much is, and the Treasurer, and they're talking a lot about what the Labor Party is doing and has done to try and limit the worst impacts of that. And the broader trends that I think we need to be really aware of is the rise of more extremist views in our political debate, and pushing back against those things where they're dangerous for our communities, so that we can continue to have a really strong and robust democracy where we have debate and we engage around ideas and we discuss them in a really sensible way, whilst pushing back on some of those fringe elements that can be quite dangerous.
Do you think the Australian political system provides some safeguards for the extreme views? Enough of a safeguard for those extreme views, or?
Well, we've seen in Australia some of those extreme views become popularised, and people have been elected on the back of those matters in the past, but not in a way that elevates them to a position of executive government. So I do think the Australian political system has some safety mechanisms built into it, and here in Tasmania, for instance, the Hare-Clark system, which is the multi-member electorate system, means that when you go into the ballot box and you cast your vote, you get to choose exactly who you're voting for, and those votes are spread out then across those candidates who put their hand up. And it generally does mean that the people elected are the average of everyone's vote rather than the fringes or the extreme elements. So we do have a protection built in through the design of our system. And the same goes federally. I do believe that we've got enough protections in place to hopefully prevent some of those most extreme voices being elected. And if they are elected, they're elected in a minority grouping. So they're not going to have the ability to control the decisions of the governing party. And I think that's something we need to be aware of and make sure that we address if we do see that change, because we need to have a strong, robust democracy that acts in everybody's interests, not just in the interests of a few.
Do you have thoughts on the Teal candidates and the Teal movement, independence?
We're seeing a shift away from the major political parties toward a range of different interest groups, and you can see that in the Teals, you can see that in Pauline Hanson or any number of other interest groups where they've got some political traction across the country. And that's the challenge for major political parties, to communicate better about why vote for Labor or the Liberal Party, if it were them making the argument, is a good idea for people. I would make the argument that a vote for a major political party, in this case the Labor Party, ensures that you get stable government, because voting for a minor party or an independent might help you feel satisfied if you're trying to send the government a message that you're not happy about the direction they're taking, but it could end up really depleting the government's ability to affect its agenda, and sometimes you just see that lapse into kind of a comatose state where you can't get very much done. You see that a little bit here in Tasmania at the moment, where we've got a minority government that looks like it's quite hamstrung about how it's governing Tasmania. So the major parties have got a job to do to convince people that we deserve their vote, and I believe the Labor Party's got a strong agenda that hopefully will convince people that we've got the right plan for this country. But that doesn't mean that the work stops there, because people are generally looking for alternatives, and we have to understand why that's the case.
So, as you'll be running in the federal election, why are you the best candidate?
I bring a lot of experience to this role, and I have a lot of great relationships, and I believe I can use those to get good outcomes for our state. I work really closely with local councils across Tasmania. I have good relationships with the state government, even though it's a different political colour to the party I represent. And I've got great relationships in Canberra that I would hope to be able to build on if I'm elected to represent Lyons there, to deliver outcomes immediately for our state. And I know how the system works, I know how to get things done, I can hit the ground running. And I believe too that I've demonstrated through my work that I work hard for people, that I bring integrity to the work that I do, and that I can work collaboratively across different segments of our community so that we can actually achieve what people want for Tassie, which is good healthcare, good housing outcomes, good education system, and a private sector that's supported by government to innovate and be employing people and providing good jobs.
What's your favourite part of the Meander Valley?
When I heard you were going to ask this question, I racked my brain, because I really like this area, and I thought if I ever moved, I would like to live somewhere between Deloraine and Westbury, because it's always so beautiful and green. It's got great pasture, and as someone who grew up on a farm, that appeals to me. But I have to say, and this is going to sound a bit strange, my favourite part of the Meander Valley is actually the Westbury Showground, because I spend a lot of time there competing in horse events, and particularly at the Westbury Show. So I have a lot of really fond memories there, and a lot of great friendships that I've shared over the years at the Westbury Showground. So that's my pick.
Now we can finish it there. I do have two more questions. What's your opinion on nuclear and all that's happening in federal about that?
In the energy space?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that nuclear power is a solution for Australia's need to decarbonise our economy at all. It's not a plan for Tasmania. We're proudly 100% renewable energy here and have been for a very long time, very proud of hydro. And I don't believe that nuclear has a place in the Australian economy. It's going to take too long to build reactors. It's going to be incredibly expensive to build them. And I believe Peter Dutton's talking about the public funding the construction of them, which is going to put the budget into enormous debt. But also, it's not going to actually put downward pressure on household energy bills. My understanding is that it could see them increase by about $1,200 at a time when people are already struggling with the cost of living. So I think this is a distraction from the main discussion we should be having as a country, which is how do we get more renewable energy into the grid. It's an anti-renewables policy from the Liberal Party, and it'll prolong the life of coal generators, which are just going to continue to pollute the atmosphere and doesn't help us meet our targets globally, and it denies investment in renewable energy projects. I've talked to proponents for projects here in Tasmania who are telling me that if Peter Dutton is elected, that capital dries up and those projects won't proceed, those jobs won't be delivered for our state. So we will lose out on jobs in Tasmania if Peter Dutton wins government.
And public transport is important. Do you have any views on passenger rail in Tasmania?
I can't remember passenger rail in Tasmania. I'm 41 years old and it's before my time when we had passenger rail. So it's something that I would enjoy, but I don't know if practically we can see that revived in Tassie. There are discussions about the potential for something in the south of the state around the capital city, but it appears like that's pretty unlikely. I'd like to see more tourist rail supported. There's a great heritage rail project in the Derwent Valley. Obviously we've got the Don River Railway up in Devonport. I believe those projects have merit and you could establish a heritage rail sector, and obviously the ALP Railway, or the West Coast Wilderness Railway is now called on the West Coast, but sadly I don't think we'll see passenger rail return to Tasmania in the near future.